So welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to look at break and continue and how they work within loops. So earlier we saw how we can build out a table within a loop, and if, for instance, we all of a sudden want to break out of this loop, we don't want to continue to the value of 10, we can do a quick check and have the ability to actually jump out of this loop. So all we need is a condition, and this condition gives us the ability to write some code, to run some code. So let's do row, and in this case, we're going to check to see if row is equal to 5. And if it is, then all we're going to do is break. So let me show you what happens now. So when we refresh the page, we actually get the five rows of content, and this is where break comes in and actually stops the execution of the loop. So there are instances where you might need to break out of the loop, and this is how you do it. You just simply enter in break. Usually it's done with a condition, and if that condition evaluates to true, then we just break out of it. So this could be used for instances if maybe some of these values you don't want to post them, if you've got some if you're working off of a set number of values and you post them in the cells, and then all of a sudden maybe something is corrupted or it's not right, then you can break out of it really easily. So the other one that I want to talk to you about is continue. So continue, we do it the same way. We do conditional, and we ask to see if, and we'll do it for 5 as well. So next, we add in continue. So what do you think will happen here? If we add in continue, we saw what happened with break, but continue is actually complete opposite of break, because break makes sense, you want to jump out of it, but continue, so what do you think continue is going to do here? And look at what the output is going to be. So when I go out and if I refresh it, what do you think happened with continue? So let me explain. So what's gone on here is we've gone through the first row, second, third, fourth, fifth, and this one is, now we know that row is equal to 5. So what's happening here is that we actually skip all of this part here with continue, and we go back to the iteration of the loop value. So all that's happened here is we've jumped over that value and we've simply skipped it. So this is important to note that if, for instance, I want to do something, if I put continue at the bottom, it's actually not going to make any difference, because this is continue at the bottom of the code and I'm not running any additional code on after here. So you can see this by this type of format. If I was setting a value, and I'm going to use holder again, so I'm going to just say for now it's empty, and what we're going to do is we're going to add some values in it. So basically I'm going to put a value of holder, and I'm going to equal it to, maybe we'll just take that value that's contained within the cell, and we'll do it like that. And then just thinking where I can output it in a more meaningful format, so just add in holder over here. So basically what's happening is they should be equal, but I've got continue over here, so watch what happens on line number 5. And we can see that they all equal up. So notice that within this cell here, it's equal to the 26 that we have here. So these values are the same, because what's happened is that we've skipped resetting the value for holder, we've gone back over to here and we've continued the loop. So holder never got a chance to update because we had continue, which was actually blocking the execution of the code if this condition was true. Welcome back, and this lesson's all about a challenge. So what I want you to do is create a loop to 1000, grab all the numbers that are multiples of 5, so 5, 10, 15, 20, all the way up to 1,000, add them together, output the numbers as they're being added together. So we output 5, we output 10, and then we have a running total. So a subtotal, the value that we're adding in, and then what the total is as we're looping through. And then lastly, after the loop completes, looping through, then let's output the complete total. So let's try that out. So open up your editor, try it out, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had an opportunity to try that out. So here's the solution. So we need to set a variable to hold our total. So right now we're going to start it out at 0. Let's do a for loop, and we're going to use variable x. Start this one out at 0. And initially we want to create our loop, so looping all the way up to 1,000. And don't forget to have that increment of x. So we're just going to make sure that we have a way out of our loop. So we've got all of this loops, and now we need to apply a condition. So conditions work really well within loops because they allow us to apply that logic on an ever-changing value. And we know that there's quite a lot of numbers, 1,000 numbers all the way up to 1,000. So we want to be really precise and pick out those values. So let's do our condition, and we're going to check to see if the value of x has a modulus 5. So basically, we're dividing it by 5, and if there's a remainder, then we know that it's not divisible by 5, and we need to skip to the next number. But if there is no remainder, so if it's equal to 0, then we know that this is a number that we can divide by 5, and we can include it within our output. So now we are picking up all those values of 5, and let's actually just do it right within the output. So do output inner HTML. So output inner HTML, and then this is where we're going to add in our statement. And then at the end of it, this is where we're going to add total equals, and then whatever our value of total is going to be. So there's a few things that we need to do within this condition. So the first one is we need to grab the value of x. So total equals total plus the value of x. So we're going to start out with 5, and we know that once we add 5 to our running total, then that total is going to constantly change. So let's value of x, and we'll do equals, and let's add x in there, and then add in something else here where we've got subtotal. So it doesn't really matter what string content you're placing in here. So basically this is going to be the current total value. So let's try this out, refresh it, and yes, quite a lot of stuff there. We should do some line breaks so it's more readable. So let's see what happened now. So let's start at the beginning. So we've got a value of 0, subtotal is 0. Next, we have a value of 5. So because we don't have any other values in there, so that's where 5 comes in. And add some spacing in there to make it even more readable. So next, we've got 10, but we already had a subtotal of 5, so we end up with 15. 15, and the value is 15, so we end up with 30. 30 plus 20, 50, so all the way, and we loop through all of these numbers, and we end up with a total, and this should be an equal sign. So let me update that and refresh. So there we go. So we've added all of those 5s all the way through, and we've ended up with a total of 99,500. And we could just as easily adjust this to 8s. So counting by 8s, and we can see that 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48. And so all we're doing is just adding those together as we're finding those numbers that are divisible by 8 without any remainder. So that's the solution to the challenge. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you even more you can do with loops. There's a lot of power with loops, and there's a lot of things you can do, especially when it comes to arrays and objects. So that's coming up. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at arrays and looping through the values of an array. So first of all, we need to create a list of arrays. So let's do one called user names, and let's create that array. So we're going to need to add in some users in here. So we'll just we're going to stick to lowercase. And so there's some users now, some usernames within the array. And let's refresh that out there. And we know that within the console here, if I do usernames, this is a quick refresher on arrays, every array has a length value. So we can actually use that and loop through an array. So let's do a for loop. We're going to do variable x, start it out and set it to equal to 0, because we know arrays start at 0. So the first index value of the array is 0, and we're going to loop through x while it's less than username's length, because this is a value that we can grab a hold of. So we know we can make use of it within our script, and then we just need to increment x. And now let's output, and we use our favorite inner HTML, and we need to output the value of the username. So let's do user names and place x within here, and then concatenate it together with a line break. So do you think doing this is going to output our value of our array? So let's take a look and see what our output is. So I refresh it. Indeed, we do get all of the usernames within the array. So we're able to loop through and pull back all of that information. So there's even a better way to do this if we want to loop through an array. We can use while. So this is another option that we have, because we know with while, it doesn't actually loop through unless this condition is true, and then we can do something with those values. So let's set up our while loop here. So we're going to loop it out twice. So we're going to loop it out a number of different ways, and then up to you, depending on your scenario and what you're trying to accomplish, to be able to choose which is the best way and which is the quickest way to output that content. So with the while loop, we need to set up a starting point. So let's use value of x, and we're going to equal x to 0. So we don't need this value of x anymore that we're looping through. So that's where we're just using that same one. And this time, let's loop through while there's a value here. So we know that if we increment x past the value that's within the usernames, we're going to throw an error, and basically we can't pull back this value anymore, and that's where we're going to break the loop. And that's where the while condition is going to come in, and it's going to know that at this point this loop is over. So let's see if this works. So let's go out, refresh it, and we are able to pull back the loop values within this type of format as well. So I want to give you a challenge actually. So what if we want to loop through this array backwards? So we saw that we're taking Mike, John, Larry, but what I want you to do is to produce Larry, John, and Mike using a for loop. And if you want, pause the video, open up your editor, give it a try. So all we're doing is, instead of Mike, John, Larry, it's Larry, John, Mike that we want to output within our output area. And I'll show you how to do that coming up. So I hope you had an opportunity to try that out. And now I'll give you the solution for this. So what we want to do is we want to loop through it backwards. And the way to do that, so set up a variable, and this variable x is not going to be equal to 0. It's actually going to be equal to the value of username's length minus 1. Because this is an array and we know that we go all the way to 0. So this is where we want to set up the array. And then this value is also dependent on what our conditional value is in order to break out of the array. So we need to check to see while x is greater than or equal to 0. So we know that once it hits 0, that's when we want this loop to stop. And the next, we want to decrease the value of x. So add in that loop. And this part, we can add that in as well. So let's try this out. So we see that that worked, and we are able to, with loops, we're actually able to reverse them, starting out with the higher number and then decreasing the value of x as we loop through. And there's one other way to loop through arrays, and this one is also very popular, also a great way, and this is new with ES 2015. So basically some of the older browsers may not be compatible with this type of format, but you can try it anyway. And if you've got your users are coming in on the newer browsers, then you can go ahead and use this way, because this is actually the simplest way to output those values. So we loop through and we get a value of, and this is where we place the name of the array. So we're out getting a value of usernames and we're just looping through it. And it's as easy as this, where we can output value. So instead of the usernames, we're outputting value. So this is the one that's actually going to be the holder for the item as we loop through all the different items within that array. So let me show you what happens now. So that's this one over here. And I know I should have a way to differentiate this. So let me add something in here to essentially to break it. So get rid of the value and for in. I'm going to call it for in. So there you go. So another way to output your content that's contained within your array. And this, again, this is probably the easiest way to do that, is just simply to loop through all the items in the array, assign a value. So this one is holding the value of the item within the array. And then all we're just doing is we're making use of that value. So this can be anything. It doesn't need to be value. It can be V, it can be B, it can be whatever value we want to assign to it. So it doesn't matter on the output. This is just the container, the holder for whatever was in this array. So with objects, there's also a lot of great ways to loop through objects, and that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to loop through objects. So let's go ahead and create an object. So we'll give it some values within this object. So maybe we could do the same thing where we had a bunch of names. So we'll call it usernames as well. So just to be consistent with what we did within our array. So we've got a number of people. So we're going to have person A is going to be Mike. Person B is going to be John. And person C is going to be Larry. So we've got our basic object. So now let's loop through the values that are contained within the object using for. And just to show you, so actually let's first refresh the page, and we can see that under usernames, if we list that out, we don't have any length here. So unlike the arrays where we saw a length value, we don't have that here within the object. So just keep that in mind. So let's loop through. So set a variable value of x and look through all the usernames. And now let's output the value of x. So inner HTML, add that together, and let's output X. So we can take a closer look and see what's actually happening within our code. So go back out and refresh it. So we see we've got A, B, C. And I should do a line break there so it's a lot more readable. So we've got values A, B, C. So they're actually the values, and we've got the name, and these are the values. So we're returning back the paired values, so we're just getting the names back. And we know that we can make use of them if we're using usernames. So we know that the object is usernames. So if we do usernames X, we get undefined. So we do need to bracket around it. So let's do X in here. And let's see if this returns back. So we need to use this type of format. We can't use the dot notation format. We need to use the bracketed format, but we're able to return back the values. So we can return back X. We saw that we're getting the name and we're also getting the value. So let's do an equal sign and try that out one more time. So we know that our object A and returns back the value of Mike, B returns back John, C returns back Larry. And that's how we can loop through our object using an array or using a loop. So for this lesson, I've got a really big challenge. And when I say really big, we're going to look at the document. So what I want you to do now is to open up your editor and loop through all of the properties contained within the document. And this is going to be our object. So we want to output the contents contained within that object. And that's going to, instead of usernames, try document. And see what type of output you get. And we'll work with it as you come back. So go ahead, pause the video, open up your editor, and loop through all of the values contained within the document object. So I hope you had an opportunity to try that out, and let me show you what the solution is. So we're going to loop through document. So we know that the document object, the DOM, is a really large object. It's got a lot of information in it. So let's take a closer look and we'll see what we're actually outputting for X. And then we can also, the same way that we output the values, we can output it this type of format as well. So let's refresh the page and we'll see what happens. So there we go. So we were able to pull back all of this information that's contained within the document. And I did say there's a lot of information contained within there. So this gives you a more visual, and as we loop through the document object, we find out all of this information. So that's how you can quickly loop through and find out what's contained within the DOM. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to build out a shopping list, and we're going to build out an array, add in items into the array, and then once the shopping list is complete, once the user doesn't want to add anything else to the shopping list, then we're going to loop through all the items in the shopping list and output them for the user to be able to see. So let's begin, and we're going to use prompt. So this prompt is going to be add item, and we're going to start out with a prompt. What do you want to add? So put a question mark there and a colon. So we're starting out with the prompt. We're asking the user, what do they want to add to the list? So we also need to create a basic default shopping list. And this is going to be just a blank array for now. So there we've got our array where we can drop stuff into our shopping list. So let's, we need to ask that user that question, what do they want to add? And now let's add the item into the list. So whatever comes back from add item, we need to push it into the shopping list. So let's take what we learned previously with arrays. So it's shopping list and array, or it should be actually push. So push is the method where we're able to push content, and we're just doing add item. So next, we need to actually ask the user if they want to continue. So let's say we need to have another prompt, or we need to have something else happen here that we need to give the user the ability to add multiple items into the shopping list. So probably the best way to go about this would be to actually create a loop and initially ask the user how many items they want to add to the shopping list, and that will tell us how many times we need to loop through this prompt. So we're going to initiate it by how many times, and this one is going to be the prompt. So this is going to be our starting prompt, and we're going to ask how many items would you like to add. So this way we're establishing what we need and what we need for our loop. So this loop variable x, and we're going to start it out at 0, and we're going to loop while it's less than how many times, and we need a way to increment x. And then this is where we're applying our logic, where we're adding to the shopping list. So we're going to continuously ask and add items, and I'm going to declare this variable out here. And then just clean that up a bit. So now we're just going to keep adding items whatever times the user wanted to add, how many items they want to add, and we're going to loop through all those items. We're adding them into the shopping list, and then finally we need to output our shopping list. There's a number of options for outputting, and I'm just going to use the simple for and my item. So we set up a value of my item to hold all of the array information, and we're going to loop through of shopping list, and all we need to do now is output to the inner HTML, and let's add to this. So we're going to add the items into our shopping list. So we're looping through them, and let's do the my item, and then concatenate out and do a line break. So let's see what happens. So refresh it. How many items would you like to add? 3. What would you like to add? Banana, apple, and let's get some milk. So we'll add those into the list, and there we go. So we've got our output. So essentially this is our shopping list. So we can also do something like this, where we've got H1 shopping list. So just to make it a little bit more neat when we're outputting, and refresh. So how many items would you like to add? 2. I'd like to add milk, and I'd also like to add apples. So there we go, shopping list, milk, and apples. So what I want you to do is to open up your editor, open up your script, and I want you to break out of this loop, asking another prompt and checking to see if the value of add item is no, then I want to stop this loop. So it doesn't matter how many times they initially say it, we want a way to break out of this loop because maybe there was a mistake or maybe there's nothing else to add. So check to see if add item is equal to no, and then stop the loop, and then we can continue and output the shopping list at that point. So pause the video, open up your script, add that in, and I'm going to show you the solution coming up. So we can do this solution with one line of code, and we're just going to check to see if add item is equal to no. And if it is, then what we're going to do is we're actually going to break out of this. So let's try this out, or see how this works. So save it, refresh it, and I want to add 66 items. So here I go. I'm going to add in some items. And okay, so that's it. I don't want to add anything else, so I'm going to just put no. And we are able to break out of our shopping list prompts, and we still got our list there being displayed. So that was the solution. At the very heart of any programming language are functions. And in this section, we're going to be covering JavaScript functions. JavaScript functions are going to allow you to execute blocks of code as needed within your application. So what you can do with a function, you can pass information to it, and you can make use of that information that's passed to the function and execute a block of code that's contained within the function. So they're kind of like little mini applications within your application that are assigned to do things. So each function should have its own set of tasks and accomplish those tasks when called upon. And there's a lot of lessons that we're going to be covering within this section in order to really illustrate how functions can be used in real life examples. So we've got a number of great exercises for you to get familiar with JavaScript functions. When you execute a function, it's called invoking, and it can be used a number of times, repeated as needed. So the repetition of functions is a crucial part of why we use functions, and also we can output calculations and return information from those functions. So the reusability of functions is at the very heart of why functions exist. We can just call upon those functions and execute that block of code when needed. Functions are really like mini programs, allowing you to selectively execute that code. Learn about functions and how they can be used. Also learn about local and global scope in variables. So this is a really important concept in JavaScript, and I'm going to be showing you some great examples of how this works and why you need to be cognizant of the fact of where you're declaring your variables and how it's relative if you're using a variable and you're declaring it within a function. So that's going to actually make it local, and if it's outside of the function, then it's global. And accessing these values in the variables is going to be dependent on where the variable gets declared. We're also going to be introducing you to some more exercises to show you some real-world application of functions in JavaScript. So we're going to create a random name generator using functions in order to return back a randomly generated name. We're also going to be building out a calculator that's going to make use of functions in order to create its mathematical operations. So we're going to be able to add, divide, subtract, and multiply by clicking and interacting with content presented within our web page. Also, learn how to pass arguments and parameters into functions. So this is really important because it allows you to send data into a function. So not all functions have to have that same data, and depending on the data that you're sending in, you could be returning different results. And this is going to be illustrated within the calculator because we're going to see how dynamic functions can really make your applications. Also, we're going to be building out a code cracking game where you're going to have to guess the random code and see how many times it takes you to guess this random code. It's going to return back either that the number is higher or lower, and depending on the return back result, you can update your guess and try to guess the number. So there's a number, 3 different numbers, 0 to 9, and it's going to tell you if it's higher or lower depending on what your guess is. And you can take this application, you can even build it out further. All of the source code is included within this course as well. So functions also don't need to have a name applied to them. They can also be used the same way variables can be used. So we can declare a variable that has a function in it, and then that variable can also change. So there's a lot of dynamic capabilities that we can apply to functions. Functions can also invoke themselves. So they can be recursive, self-invoking functions that can also loop through content, and similar to loops, they can apply the same code multiple times until a condition becomes true. We're also going to be building out a word guessing game using recursive functions. We're going to improve upon that game by adding in shuffling using an array where we can shuffle that array and return back different items. So we're going to be taking what we learned from the earlier sections and applying it within the exercises of this section. Also, function scope, how to review and find out what is global and what is local. So where you're declaring your variables is going to make your variables either global or local. So we're going to be discussing what that is and how that works in JavaScript. Also, how to extend your arrays by removing out duplicates. So we're going to be building out a useful code snippet from scratch as another exercise in order to illustrate what functions can be used for. And there's a lot of uses for functions within programming. Another thing that we're going to be showing you in this section is how to invoke functions within functions. So we can add functions within functions, and we're going to be building out a shopping list that's going to allow us to intake user input and add items into our current list to be displayed within our HTML page. So another exercise from scratch in order to illustrate how functions work. Also callbacks within a function and how we can pass even more information and another function as a parameter within a function to get that executed within that function. Also showing you how we can improve upon that JavaScript calculator that we built earlier in the section, and we're going to improve upon that build by making the code more efficient. And that's one of the things about becoming a programmer, is that we take code and we try to build it as efficiently as possible using our code and programming knowledge. And we're also going to be building out an additional exercise within this section where we're going to have a deck of cards, and then I'm going to show you how to deal out that deck of cards to any number of players. So dynamically selecting the number of players that you want to deal out the cards to, and we're going to deal those cards out, and all of this is going to be accomplished using JavaScript and mainly functions within the source code. And remember, the best way to learn is to push yourself. And this section covers a lot of exercises, so you can really become comfortable with using functions and learn and see the power of functions within JavaScript.